Hello, everybody, and welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I am so ready to talk some fantasy with my friend Charles.
I am so ready too. I'm actually really excited for this one. This is a long time coming. We finally finished the Liveship Traders trilogy by Robin Hobb, and this has been a highly anticipated conversation for me, and I know it's been for you as well. It's the end of the Liveship Traders, which is the second trilogy in the realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb, and we're big Robin Hobb fans, and there's so much to unpack about this book, and I'm so excited to get into it.
Yeah, I'm super excited too, Charles. I don't know what else to refer to this book and this series as other than a masterpiece. It is just
such a masterpiece.
We love a lot of fantasy books, a lot of series out there, and we're just big fans of the genre, so we're prone to enjoying things. So then I'm like, how do I get across that this just was chef's kiss, if you will? Like, this was just a rare experience reading a series like this as so masterfully crafted. And I mean, that's just what I'm trying to do now, Charles, before we start moving toward the actual main discussion and spoilers and all that kind of stuff. Is like, dude, if you have not yet read Liveship Traders trilogy or any of the books, or you haven't finished it or any of that, and you're listening to this episode, just turn this down in your headphones and just go read it. Because I mean, we've talked about this before, is like, why aren't people screaming from the rooftops about this series? Why I very much loved the Farseer trilogy. I know you did too, Charles. Yeah. But that is always what's recommended when it comes to Robin Hobb. And I'm like, this is a tier or tiers above that already awesome series.
I had that thought too. I was like, everyone is screaming about, Assassin's Apprentice, the Farseer trilogy, but like, this is the next step up from that in my mind. It's like, I feel like people read that trilogy and were like, yeah, I get Robin Hobb, I've read it, I'm done. But it's like, no, this is, to me, the next thing. And it gets to the point, Dylan, sometimes we have these book discussion episodes where all of a sudden I feel the pressure that I'm putting myself under increase, because it's like, how do you do a book as rich in context as this one any kind of justice? And that's just what I'm feeling. A book as challenging, as emotional, as exciting, as, poetic of a story as this is. How do we unpack it in the time that we're given for this episode? But I'm looking forward to it. I think the best place to start is just, we've already kind of hinted at our initial impressions, but it's like, to build off of what you were saying about how it's just so much better than the first trilogy. I completely agree. I could not put this trilogy down. I actually read this book like over a month ago now, because I just couldn't wait in our listening schedule. I couldn't stop. It was like I needed to read the next one. I had already started this one when we were recording our Mad Ship episode, the second book, because I just couldn't put it down. So now the story's kind of combined in my brain. I had this feeling, Dylan, I don't know if you had. Yeah, it's fine. And now that we're at the end,
exactly. If you're listening to this episode and you're someone who is okay with moving forward past the spoiler warning, then you're someone who probably has read this whole series. So, Charles, I think luckily we're in the place where you don't have to make sure everything you're talking about occurred in which book or what. But it's all fair game in this.
All fair game, and I thought that while we're talking about spoilers, the ending of this was so strong. It's I remember leaving our discussion of the second book being like, where is this character gonna go? How could it possibly have a final feeling ending for some of these characters, because their wants are so conflicting with what's happening plot wise on the page. And then to get where we got, where all these characters are finally in the same scene together for the first time, you're like, oh my god, this is incredible. Sometimes shocking and challenging, I'll say, but incredible throughout. And as we get more into the specific scenes that I think you know where I'm referring to, is just like the way Robin Hobb handles it is unlike anything I've ever read. I had this thought where I was like, I felt like I've read all of the best in the genre. You know, I go down all the top 10 lists. I've read them all. It's hard to imagine that there's an experience out there that you'll read it and be like, wow, I've read something I've never read before. I've been moved in a way I haven't been moved in a book in a long time. So I was so surprised to watch that happen to me again in this book, like it happened in the second one. There were so many beautiful things I loved about Mad Ship, but Ship of Destiny, my God, it's like, it's the next level.
It is the next level. Charles, you're talking about how great that ending is. I think and again, not speaking to specifics yet until we get into spoiler territory, but I'll just say the general framing of this kind of like characters mostly being together, characters going all over the place, like on their own journeys, and like this rotating point of view that's just all over the map, and then characters all coming back together mostly, and having the integration of all of those individual arcs into one like very full story like that. How deep are we into the episode? Is it too early to start crapping on Game of Thrones?
We're about 8 minutes in. I think we could get away with it.
Yeah, 8 minutes. It's fair.
No one's listening.
Charles and I are huge fans of A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones, and that's why we were so let down by, like so many others, by the ending. It felt like Game of Thrones, the structure of it was kind of supposed to feel like this.
Yeah.
And then something right at that, like that landing place of everyone coming together, just at least in the show. I think if the books do ever come out in full, I do have faith that George would make it feel the way that Robin Hobb made this feel. But it's just like, it feels in a way that some of the characters that we'll get into a little in more detail, like had this feeling of being complete at the end of the story, right? That's very, we'll speak to that more, but like, that's how I felt about the whole story itself. Just felt so complete and fulfilling and just right. And it's so rare to just have everything, like, not that it was all tied up in a neat little bow, but neither is life. And it just felt right in that way.
And that's Robin Hobb's unique gift. She always finds a way to make the interpersonal conflicts and even the internal turmoil characters go through come from such a real and honest place where her books almost come off like, especially with the Farseer trilogy, it's like, well, this is kind of a bummer. This character is just kind of depressing and fantasy's favorite doormat. But there's like an honesty to it that is so unique to Robin Hobb. And these characters are so lively and proactive and dynamic that it's like, I remember when I finished the Farseer trilogy having the same feeling of like, wow, this is impacting like my soul right now, some of what's happening here. And it's just the way she's able to connect with those basic human relationships of things like, you know, family and intergenerational conflict, identity, love and loss, and all of those things. And she spends hundreds of pages, thousands, building these relationships. You get to know these characters so well that you're able to connect with them in a way that you don't normally get with a lot of fantasy characters. And with that, Dylan, I think we need to jump right into some of these character arcs and relationships.
Yeah.
There's so many to get to. I suggest we start with Althea because she's kind of like our main character from the first book, and we kind of got away from her in the second, and then she comes back in like a pretty big way in the third book. I mean, in the same vein, we can talk about Brashen and Paragon and kind of all those characters in one go. And what did you think? Because at the end of the last episode, we were like, how could Althea's story ever end the way she wants it to? What is a satisfying ending for Althea? You know, and then here we are.
Yeah, I mean, obviously with Althea, I'll speak to. There's one specific very terrible thing in terms of the rape that occurs, and that was, I assume, that was what you were referring to.
Wasn't that scene just absolutely insane?
Yeah. I mean, I hope, I don't think we did our spoiler warning.
You did give yours. You said turn it down your headphones. It wasn't like official, but
it wasn't official.
You had said it, yeah.
Okay, they knew this was.
We're 11 and a half minutes in here. We're talking. We're good.
That's fair. Okay. Well, I just revealed one of the hugest things, so I'm sorry if that's. But I think that is a place to start, just because it is like one of the most critical things that occurs in this book, especially to Althea and something that kind of shifts our perspective, I think, of Kenneth. But when it comes to Althea, it's besides that part, in terms of the way the ending of her arc feels, especially with the bit where she gives her pain back to Paragon, which we can get into in more detail because that was really interesting. With that in mind, it's one of those endings of, she didn't get what she wants, but she did get what she needs. And
well said.
Yeah. And those are, to me, oftentimes the most satisfying character arcs.
I agree. And at the beginning, Althea was like, I'm going to take back the Vivacia. I'm going to pick up where my father, who I admired, left off, and I'm going to be the captain of the ship, right? And I'm going to lead the crew. In the beginning, she was struggling with, she was younger and she was a woman. And that from the beginning got her at odds with Kyle. And I think leading up to this pinnacle moment of meeting Kenneth and then immediately being assaulted and taken advantage of by Kenneth is such a culmination of all of the kind of challenges she's had to go through her whole life. Because we remember when she was younger, she was also assaulted, but at that time she didn't really know what was happening. She thought she liked the guy, and the guy used her to get back at her dad, essentially. Right? And that kind of, it affected her relationship with her sister. It affected the way that just her whole mind around relationships and her own self-worth and things like that came to a head again with Brashen, where she kept putting herself down for being with him because he was older and he did have a position of leadership, and they knew they couldn't be together and this and that. And then it happens again in this book with Kenneth. And then, but this time is different because she fought for herself, right? It's kind of like she was able to realize this is a unfair, horrible thing that happened to me, and I'm reacting to it. And to see her get challenged so much at the third act of this story, you're like, oh my God, this is so intense. But it gets us to her kind of arc of I can accept that I can be with Brashen and feel loved, and this is where my sense of self is, and I don't need to win over all these other people or convince all these other people of anything. You know, she was able to come back from that, and she had such a challenging time with it, but she was so strong handling all of that that you could see how much she's changed throughout the 3-book arc.
Yeah, you can. And I think that what I really appreciated when it comes to Robin Hobb's depiction of a character being raped is that oftentimes writers will use the like that as a plot device that serves the rapist basically as like part of their plot, while or serves a man who is not the one who was assaulted, like is, let's say, in Brashen's position here. Like it becomes like, oh, look how Brashen like responds to this and gets revenge or whatever, right? Whatever sort of thing it could have been that Brashen becomes the hero here. Especially this was in the 90s, right? Like that. Those are the kind of stories being told. But for Robin Hobb's writing, it is part of Althea's story and part of her arc in a way where the impact on her is the main focus by far. And it is part of this, and we'll get into it more with Kenneth, but it is part of this story that Robin Hobb is telling overall about the like cycle of abuse that can play out. And I think that part is a little bit more in the Kenneth side of things, but
it's a super interesting part of Kenneth's character.
Yeah, but when it comes to Althea, it's her resilience in the face of experiencing this, and that is the focus, and how she deals with it, and how she is able to, like, of course, like through interactions with Paragon, and then through making explicit choices about who she wants to be in relation to Brashen. Like she does make, like she has the autonomy here, and she is the one making these choices, and it's her story.
And even when everyone in this book was like gaslighting her like crazy, she never wavered on her opinion of Kenneth after the rape occurred, which the first time when she was a child and she's retelling that story, it was like, oh, I thought I liked him, like he took advantage of me, it was sad, whatever. But now she's like, like there's quotes throughout the book, she's like, Kenneth the rapist, you know, like she there's nothing anyone could have said to have changed her mind. And even when she first met Kenneth, she's like, oh, this guy's like kind of charming, he's like, I get the appeal kind of thing. Like she had some of those thoughts, and Kenneth kind of manipulates that to other people, saying like, oh, she said I look good in this outfit, you know, which is insane, but it's part of his manipulative tactics that ended up working. But she never ever gave up, even when people like Wintro and Vivacia didn't believe her. Like she was still adamant, and I think that shows that level of maturity that Althea was working towards, where she thought she earned it just by being her father's daughter, right? Like, I'm supposed to inherit this, people are supposed to follow me, and to actually becoming a person of inner strength. It was good to see.
Yeah, and it's good to see her eventually reach a place where I think a big theme here toward the end of the book, especially with the Liveships, is this feeling of being complete by the end of it. It's very explicitly said by characters like Paragon or Vivacia. It's like there's certain things that they have to integrate about their basically like inner like multiple personalities, because they're composed of like they're the ancestors of that family line, but also at least one dragon that never got to be born, and in Paragon's case, multiple. It's like, so
and they all have scars, and they all have like physical scarring too. Like,
that is of course very explicit with the with the live ships, but it also plays out for sure with the other characters and with Althea as one in particular, because she defined herself so clearly in relation to her live ship, where she wasn't complete, and she felt this inner longing of like, there's no version of me that I could be satisfied with that isn't currently captaining Vivacia. That's
Right.
it. And by the end, in this sort of what I'm getting at with this, she didn't get what she wanted, but eventually she got what she needed. Is she carved out life for herself that was not captaining the Vivacia. In fact, like willingly seeing like, oh wow, by the time I got back to this, like Wintrow's doing that. So like kind of relenting when it comes to that want, and then seeing like, what did I actually want my life to be like? And she can get all of that on the Paragon. And she can also actually find a fulfilling relationship on the like being with Brashen as someone who genuinely cares for her and who she has a history with. And it's this feeling that by the end, okay, if you told Althea, you know, the day that Kyle basically took Vivacia from her, if you want to frame it that way.
Yeah.
Like, oh, hey, here's what your life is going to look like by, you know, in whatever is like 2,500 pages. She'd be like, no way I would be happy with that. I can only think of like being happy with the Vivacia. But the maturity that she's shown is realizing like, what are my actual values? What are the things I want in life? And, oh, wait, all of that is possible for me here. And that's pretty incredible.
It's incredible. And it speaks to the brilliance of Robin Hobb, and where she creates these conflicts that somehow yield these satisfying yet tender resolutions, where by giving up her claim to Vivacia, it makes her ready to be the captain of a vessel. You know, where it's like, the whole point was she wanted to be the captain of a vessel, the Vivacia, but she was never truly ready, and she never really was at peace with it until she gave it up, and that made her ready to captain something like the Paragon. And that, it seems counterintuitive, like, oh, you withdraw your claim in order to claim it, like you don't become a captain and that makes you, by refusing a captainship, that makes you a good captain. It's like, yeah, it does.
George Washington stuff right there.
I don't want it. Yeah, exactly. Or it makes you Jon Snow. I don't want it. I don't want it.
I don't want the Vivacia.
I don't want the Vivacia. My queen. But my pirate lord. Yeah, but it makes her that way. And then it's kind of interesting you draw that parallel to the Paragon, because a lot of this stuff you can tell, like the titles of these books and everything, they're all talking about the ship, the Paragon, because the Paragon, it's revealed in this book, has a relationship with pretty much every character, Kenneth included, that we didn't realize before. And it's like kind of what's happening to Paragon is an analogy for the entire grand arc of all of these characters, and the fact that the Paragon is finally complete at the end of this. It's got a new face, which I don't know if you caught was Fitz's face, and is able to go. You're looking at me. Did you not know that the boat was made to look like Fitz?
Not know that.
Did you know that Amber was the fool?
Yeah, I was piecing together that Amber was someone critical from that story, but I guess I missed the.
Yeah,
what are the things? I know it's been a month, but so I realized Amber was someone.
I went through this whole thing while I was reading book 2, and I purposefully didn't bring it up because I'd already started reading book 3, and I didn't want to like pull in stuff from book 3 in our book 2 discussion. But the first thing that happens is they talk about her skin and how it kind of was paper white and now it's tan, and I was like, that's unusual. And there was something that stuck with me at the end of the Farseer trilogy, where they were like, why do you think the fool's a man? The fool's obviously a woman. And I was like, that was a weird moment to put at the end of this book, and it always stuck with me. Like, what does the Fool look like? Where some people are convinced that the Fool is male, and some people are convinced that the Fool is female, and the Fool never makes any corrections. They have a whole conversation about it.
Yeah.
And then the thing that gave it away was the fact that Amber was wearing the earring that, God, what's his name? Fitz's adopted dad, Burrich. That Burrich gave Fitz. Well, Burrich gave the original Fitz. Fitz died, and so Lady Patience had it. Lady Patience gave it to Fitz.
Wait. You mean
the earring?
The original. So
remember, there was an
Fitz's
earring.
Dad.
So Burrich's grandma was a slave and bought her like freedom, and the earring is a mark that you are a Chalced slave that was freed. So it belonged to Burrich. Burrich gave it to King Fitz because he was Fitz's man, or whatever, they'd say that over. Or Chivalry's man, I'm sorry. He gave it to Chivalry.
Okay.
He gave it to Chivalry as a token of his devotion to Chivalry. Then Chivalry died, and Lady Patience had it, and she was like, oh, here's a fun earring. You can have it. And then he gave it to the Fool, and then the Fool was wearing it, right? So I was like, oh, this is the Fool. The Fool, as we know, can present as female or male, depending on what character you're talking about. Then there's I'll pull up some lines in here, but it's like, oh, you're talking like a fool. And then it's like, she pauses, like, oh, yeah, like I've been called a fool as much as a prophet, like that kind of stuff. And the Fool is made puppets, right? And was a master of all this woodworking. And so that's why she's able to carve all the stuff. Like, I got it. And I highlighted some stuff because I was like, oh my gosh, Amber is the Fool. And it's all but confirmed. And then when they're carving the Paragon, it's described as having a tied back ponytail, a broken nose, carrying the axe. And it was like, oh, he's supposed to have amber eyes, not blue. And he was very adamant about Amber was adamant about that. So I was like, oh, that's Fitz. Oh, yeah, are you going to fix his nose? There's nothing wrong with his nose, Amber asserted warningly. So it's just the idea that...
Dude, okay. I feel like we've revealed two fools here.
I mean, it was very Amber discreet.
And myself. Because
I'm trying to find some of the clues in here.
So some of it, like the tracking of a ring from a series that I read at this point a while ago. I don't blame myself too much for that one, but it's and then is my image of Fitz in my head strong enough where I could recognize that?
No.
So I knew that Amber was from the duchies. I'd figured that out. So I was like, I feel like she's someone from that land. But because I think she's saying at the end too that she was going to go back, right? Go back, north or whatever. Which I was like, okay, so she is. But I just completely you're saying all these things. I'm like, how did I not realize this? Because I was on the track, but nowhere near the actual answer, and it seems like I don't know. I'm like, how did I not figure this out?
Yeah, I'll find some of the. I will find some of because I started highlighting them. I was like, this is evidence. I need to highlight this.
The Fool is always this. There's only one other character in this larger universe that's always talking about their role in terms of a prophecy and all that kind of stuff. It's basically just Amber and the Fool, and I think we're starting to learn that they're the same. So that is. It seems so obvious now, especially with lines like that. I've been called a fool as much.
Oh, yeah.
I remember saying that too. And I'm like, oh, geez. I can't believe that. So, my brain let me down, Charles.
And then she said, something about she wears a freedom ring in one ear, and which is okay. The earring that Chalcedian freed slaves must purchase and wear to prove they have been granted their freedom. I asked her once if she had bought her freedom or if it had belonged to her mother. She was quiet for a time and then said it was a gift from her one true love. When I asked Amber why she helped us, she simply said that she had to, that for some reason of her own it was important to her. So that was the first thing that had my ears up. I'm like, there's only one earring like that I know of, and I believe if I track it back, it's in the hands of the fool right now, but I couldn't remember.
That's clever.
And then there's a line where she's like, I've been called a fool as much as a prophet, and it comes up a bunch of times. It mentions the paper
white
skin
thing is that is, and I think like you're saying these lines, and now I'm remembering reading them, and just like some of them I was like, that's probably important, but it's not clicking for me, and others I was like, okay, like so she got 10. Like, but I'm like, no.
Yeah, it's like, she's been out in the sun, so she got 10. Yeah.
But now I'm like, that's exactly how the fool was described, was like paper white. And I don't know. I think I probably also, like, I think I was just restricted by, you have this image of the fool in your head from having read the first series. And it's just nothing like the image in my head for how I started picturing Amber at the start of this series. Because at that point, right, when the characters first introduced, like, I don't know. And I don't always have the most, like, on point, like, what I'm picturing in my head of the characters actually, like, what they look like. Like, I get an image in my head, but I always say, like with Mistborn, Kelsier's blonde. I can't do it. I can't.
Oh yeah, that's
blonde.
Interesting.
Like in my head, he's got dark hair. Why? I don't know. But like the things get in my head, and then they're not always true to that character. So maybe the character was described very similarly to how the Fool's described. Maybe Amber was, but I just got some image in my head that looked nothing like my image of the Fool. I couldn't integrate it. I couldn't do it, Charles. We're not all as clever as you. Stop looking at
I found another, and that's true. And I don't think it's one that's critically important to the story, like, at all.
No, but it's interesting.
I just got a little bit of enjoyment out of it. I'm like, oh, she carved Fitz's image into the Paragon. And so that's out there. And Amber is the Fool. And Amber's more, convincing to be a female than we thought, because we're so in Fitz's mind, and there's never a doubt in Fitz's mind in the Farseer trilogy that the Fool is male. And it's like only like a throwaway line at the end of the third book where what's her face, the bard character, was like, "What are you talking about? The Fool is a woman." And then Fitz is like, "What?" I feel like I would have known that at any point in my life, and the Fool is like, well, I'm the Fool. So it's kind of interesting. And there's a line in here where the Paragon and Amber are talking, and the Paragon goes, "What exactly are you?" And then Amber gave a small laugh that had no joy in it. "In a word I do not know how to tell you. I have been called a fool as often I have been called a prophet. I follow a path I cannot see clearly. There are guides along the way, but I cannot always find them. I set out seeking a slave boy with 9 fingers." Like that kind of, like, we knew that the Fool had this prophetic or nature about them from the Farseer trilogy. So it's kind of interesting that this is the character bridging the gaps. So,
I gotta reread the whole series, picturing Amber as a completely.
I know, that's what I thought too.
Because it's just going to completely blow my mind. But that's the beauty of Robin Hobb.
That's the beauty. You don't
Robin,
have to catch a glimmer of that.
You got me. But
let's move on.
Next series, I'm going to have my eyes out for Fools.
You're not getting away with it. Well, the next series is called, I think, Fitz and the Fool, right? That's the next trilogy.
Right. Well, in that one, she'll never be able to trick me. I will know who the Fool is and Fitz and the Fool. I will not mistake the Fool for Fitz.
They'll find a way to sneak in, like, Malta or something. They'll be like, "Malta? What are you doing here?"
Malta was the Fool.
Malta's one of my candidates for coming back. So because she's been touched by the dragon, the dragon's like, oh, you'll enjoy a long life with that, and you're just like, And Malta's interesting. I don't know. But before we get into Malta, I think let's talk about Kennit. We're talking about big reveals. Kennit being Ludluck, the lost Ludluck. Amazing. Incredible. Yeah. What a twist, because it explains why he knows so much about Liveships, and it brings in that tragic origin story to his character where you're like, how could someone so emotionally cut off and so manipulative exist? And you find out there's the magical component to it. It was poetry. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a great reveal for sure, and it tied everything into this. It took a bunch of disparate arcs and suddenly made it like, oh, this is how they're all going to tie together in a way that totally makes sense. So I give Hobb a lot of credit for that. It does also help explain, like, Paragon gets into this at the end, that basically Kennit had died multiple times before, and it was one of those like what was that character in Game of Thrones? Was it Beric Dondarrion? It's like, every time you come back, you're a little bit less. It's
exactly.
So,
and then it's the fact that Kennit's plan was to feed all of his trauma and emotion to Paragon and cast it off
just
and aside.
Sink it. Yeah.
Crazy. And then lock away his mom and like compartmentalize all that stuff. And now he's a guy with no weaknesses and no emotional vulnerabilities. It's an interesting trait. And then, I kind of like at the end of the second book, we were like, this Kennit guy, I don't know, not so bad. And then you're can we retcon that? Like, I think Robin Hobb knew in a way. I'm like, this person needs to. He's too charming, like a Jack Sparrow type. He's still like a thieving, murderous, pillaging, raping pirate. Like we gotta remove some of the charm from him and reveal the bad side that has always been with Kennit.
In part, yeah. I think like we can, as easily as everyone else around him, like be kind of fooled into believing this Kennit as the charismatic, like you said, almost Jack Sparrow type pirate. And I think I was just waiting for like, when are his external behaviors actually going to align with all these like horrible things that he's thinking? And then they did. And I mean, it takes Kennit from like to that point in the series. I was like, yeah, he's done some bad things, but like, I don't know. There seems to maybe be underneath that, like, that hard exterior he's trying to put out there. Like, is this soft, vulnerable person? That still does exist, but we don't ever get to it in a way where he becomes this like genuine, decent human being. We instead see him basically just try to do the same thing he's already like done to some extent with Paragon to Althea, right? It is this like he doesn't even quite know why he did it at first, but we can kind of piece it together, and then he does too to some extent. But it's like he sees Althea, and immediately Althea reminds him of Wintro. So
yeah, it's like the female version of Wintro, which is like the most arousing thing for Kennit, which is so messed up.
Because so here's the whole process with it, right? Wintro, I don't know to what extent physically at all, but in terms of like how he's carrying himself, who he is in relation to Kennit, Kennit, like from the start, is kind of grappling with this, like, like he reminds me of me at the young age that I was when Egrat did all these things to me, and then even the like charm on his wrist is like, oh, are you gonna do to him what what Egret did to you. And Ken's like, no, like I would never do that to a young boy. Like that's kind of how Kenneth is able to not like do something terrible to Wintrow like that. But that urge, I think, is inside of him to do this like I'm passing on my trauma or my pain this way that someone else made me feel powerless. Like I am going to try to feel powerful by doing that to you. And he doesn't do it to Wintrow, but when Althea comes on board and it's like, oh, it's like basically Wintrow, but I can like do a little more mental gymnastics here to convince myself like, okay, this is like a grown woman and like I'm convincing myself she is attracted to me and actually does want me. And eventually like there's enough things there where he basically does act on that, I think, same urge that he had when he first saw Wintrow. It just had been like slightly removed enough from the context where he, whatever was a barrier to him doing that, he did. And then just very clearly when he's pressed, I think by the charm, like the Wizardwood charm, I believe that's when he finally is like able to figure out he wanted to like do what was done to him to someone else to feel like powerful. So it's right. And it's pretty wild because obviously then it results in we'll get to it, I guess, like Althea like returning that pain back to Paragon, where it kind of like where Kenneth is already like part of the whole thing. So it's a pretty wild, like psychodynamic situation going on.
Because the whole, even in the second book, it started to show that the Kenneth origin story a little bit, that there was trauma there. He was kind of perversely attracted to Wintrow, and you saw like when he was kind of in moments where he was incapacitated, he was like, no, please. Like he was evoking memories of being this victim of assault from Egret. And so, when all those things are happening, you start to relate to him in some way. But, you know, this book takes it to the next level where it's kind of like the cyclical nature of assault, right? But this was still Kenneth's choice. And there was like a creepy line where it was like Althea was wearing Wintrow's clothes, and it's like she probably did that to appear less attractive, but nothing could be further from the truth. You know, like weird stuff going on in his mind. It's like compound of his, his love for Wintrow being confused and sexualized by his own assault, combined with the fact that he wants to kind of dominate this person. Yeah.
His relationship to Wintrow, I think, besides abuse, which is obviously a huge thing that characterized his relationship with Egret, but his relationship with Wintrow, I think, was very similar other than the abuse. Like, I think there was this, like...
here.
Go ahead. So,
well, this doesn't speak to his relationship with Wintrow, which is super fascinating, but it's like why he did it, right? Where it's first he said she had probably put on Wintrow's clothes, believing them less provocative than his nightshirt. Exactly the opposite was true. Very creepy. Then the charm goes, "What made you do it, Kenneth? Was that the only way to banish the memories finally by giving them to someone else?" It's like, whoa, that's intense. And then he goes, "Perhaps so I could finally understand why he did it to me," was the line. How he could do that to me, how he could pendulum between kindness and cruelty, between lessons in etiquette and seizures of rage. Kenneth's voice fell away, and then the charm was basically called him a poor, pathetic bastard after that. You've only yourself to fear now. He says, actually, this part is... her drama is just so intense. "You poor, pathetic bastard," the charm ground out the slow, accusing words. "You've become Egret. Do you know that? To defeat the monster, you became the monster." The tiny voice became even fainter. "You have only yourself to fear now." And that's the end of like the chapter, which you're like, holy smokes, this
That
stuff is heavy. And it's so good when a book can challenge you in a way. And I've said that word a couple times now, because that's really what I felt during these moments where it's like a very like uncomfortable, explicit rape scene, where it's not in like get into all the details, but it's still like it plays out the scene from Althea's perspective, and it just feels so wrong and so violating. Compound with Kenneth's all of the cycles of how wrong what Kenneth's doing is, where you factor in his abuse as a child and his relationship with Wintrow, and it all just comes in, and you're trying to unpack what just happened, and you're just not. It's then you're getting into the cycle of abuse and all of this stuff, like real psychology stuff, right, Mr. Student of Psychology, and you're just it's difficult, and you're in the perspective of a rapist trying to go through why he did it, and it's tough. It's really difficult.
Yeah, it is really challenging, and I think it is a very difficult thing to portray in any sort of way that makes it feel like it was like worth doing for the story. Like, meaning, if you're going to include rape in a story, you better be thinking long and hard about, why am I doing this? What does this offer? And I think in Robin Hobb's case, it is one that she did put all of that thought into, and she did in a way where, like, it does, as you said, challenge the reader, and it does speak to this larger theme of the cycle of abuse, of trauma, and it does also not let Kenneth off the hook in any way. And it really, I think, portrays it as well as I've ever seen it done. And
I agree.
For the reasons we talked about, of how it fuels Althea's development rather than serving that of someone else. But of course, I don't know if it fuels Kenneth's development so much as like reveals more of like what has been going on for him, because he doesn't grow or really change from it, I don't think.
No.
Until his death.
It puts him past the point of no return. It puts him in the irredeemable category.
But that's more, I guess, for our view of him, it makes him irredeemable, but it doesn't change who he is or has been this whole time. And I think it is just, we've been sitting there thinking, well, when is this guy actually going to do something in line with all of these thoughts we're seeing? Is he really such a bad guy? And this is where you're like, oh yeah, he is, as you said, irredeemable, and probably has been the whole time. This was always in him. And it's sad too, and I think this is part of the challenging aspect of it, is while we do not condone anything that he does, while we think it is despicable and makes him irredeemable, we do feel empathy for someone who has had this done to them. We do see it as sad. Like, this is horrible. It evokes anger,
a tragedy.
But it also evokes sadness. Like, this person has been, had this done to them and has become a monster in part because of that. So it's like you are challenged to feel something and all sorts of emotions for all of these characters involved. And I've never seen anything like it. So
me neither. And we talked about Game of Thrones earlier, and to me it's like, if there was a blemish on the Game of Thrones, it's the very 2010s, 2000s, like grimdark edgelordy thing to just casually have scenes of assault and rape and stuff like that. And I don't know. I've just never seen it handled in this way, with such consideration for like the systematic perpetration of it and why it happens, and trying to understand that, as much as we are reconciling with the action itself. And the fact that it's built off of the intrigue that is Kenneth's origin story this whole time. it's such a central part of who he is as a character that I don't know. It's, you could tell it was her intention from the beginning, and she approached it so thoughtfully and so in depth in such a way that I don't know how you even begin to think of something like this, let alone write it so beautifully.
Yeah, that's well said, Charles.
And then I think there's when he dies finally, right? Yeah. Well, he gets killed like 80% into the book, and I think there's that moment where he's like. He like smiles, right? Like he's complete. You know, that's kind of his arc, right? I'm trying to remember.
Well, I'm trying to remember. There might have been a smile, but there is that moment where he's basically like dying on Paragon. And it is this moment where he's kind of coming to terms with it, and then it just goes white, I think. And I know then Paragon, who speaks to like Kenna as part of me now, views himself as complete.
Okay, it is. That's probably correct.
I'd be curious about the Kenneth like actual death scene moment. What is going on in his head? Because I'm struggling to remember the details of it. But
I know he was brought to the Paragon to die there to be part of it. So I know that was a piece of it, but it's one of those things where it's like almost this inevitable conclusion for him that like he's either rules the whole thing or he's dead. There's only the two ways it's going to go.
I think there's two main things really to talk about with Kenneth remaining. One is the nature of how he gets killed and our thoughts on that. And then the other thing is, I guess, just briefly going back to the idea of like the way that things end with Althea's arc is the Paragon is basically like, okay, I can't take your memories. And in fact, like Althea is like, I don't want to forget that this happened. Like then like the impact on me and the fact that other people it would almost make other people potentially seem like they're right if I can't remember, like that kind of stuff. The people didn't believe her. Like, but Paragon says I can take the pain, basically the trauma part of it from you. And this is like a magical device here that obviously like in the real world would not be an option to like the idea of working through that trauma in like the context of therapy or what have you is feasible. But the idea of just being able to like, now I give it to a live ship, that is obviously different. But in terms of fitting that into this like coming full circle of it, like how do you step out of the cycle of abuse? It's interesting. It's not something Althea like grapples with for very long, and it's not like she at any point like was tempted to engage in the cycle of abuse. Meaning like it's not like she was looking at someone being like, like how could Kenneth do that to me? I'm going to do it to someone else or anything. But it is this kind of, okay, now the trauma is almost laid to rest. I guess I'm curious. Like I was trying to piece together, like, what do I think of this? Like, what do I think of that as the ending?
I kind of interpreted it as like, you know, a big theme of this whole book was identity. And I think everyone in this book struggles with their identity, whether it's intergenerational relationships and things like that. And I think for Kenneth, it's like you can't ignore the bad parts of your life. You can't undo your past. To compartmentalize it as literally as he did, it takes it to the fantastical degree. But it goes to say that, you know, you can experience trauma like Kenneth had. The worst, he was an innocent child. He didn't deserve anything that happened to him. Horrible, horrible stuff. Yeah. And he chose to not address it and live his life outside of it. And it kind of corrupted him in such a way.
Can I speak to that too? Because I think a key part of it is that on top of what you're talking about, Paragon basically like is taking the blame at the end by saying, hey, like Kenneth died multiple times, and like the first time I brought him back, I'm like, I can't let this happen, so I bring him back, and he died because Egret just beat him to death, like, and then it happens again, and Paragon's able to like bring him back again, right? And there's that thing we talked about with every time and come back a little bit less. And Paragon was even like, I probably like that second time, I probably really should not have done that. Like, I was bringing him back for me, not for him, and I wasn't even sure like what was going to be left of this person when I was bringing them back. So in some ways, that's Paragon, like saying like, it's my fault. Like, I left this, like, for lack of better way of putting it, like, shell of a person. Like, this person who was robbed of all of their humanity. I brought them back and set them on this path that they would never have been equipped to handle.
And it's so interesting.
Then Paragon's taking that pain back. Obviously, Kenneth's part of him. But it's like, go ahead.
And then how healthy was Paragon for most of the book? You know,
Not very.
Just absolutely insane. So that no one understood. And it was like the black sheep of the family. In the second book, when he's sold from the Ludluck family, that was an emotional scene. But it's one of those things where it's like there's a lot of charming qualities about adult Kenneth. And I think the stain on his character was the fact that he did not process his trauma. He did not, he attempted to cut those parts from his life and distance himself from his family and his former life and go as far as to banish his mom to an island and then breach the ship. Like, he went to the nth degree to seclude his heart, is what Paragon refers to, like his mom and everything is like this Kenneth's heart. Like, he literally cast it away. And then you look at Althea, who goes through the abuse as well, and she goes back to Brashen, and she keeps like this identity to herself. Like, granted, they didn't go through the same stuff, but they went through similar stuff, and the fact that they're juxtaposed or happening right at the same time with each other, you're like, okay, this is the tragic outcome and this is the kind of hopeful outcome for going through some sort of trauma, right? So to me, that kind of sense of identity is what pairs it, and he's like the cautionary tale. Here's someone who ignored this traumatic part of their identity, because you think like, oh, bad things, if I forget about them, I can just be happy. It's like, yeah, you can maybe be a sociopathic, narcissist, pirate lord, like, but at the end of the day, you're going to crack under it. Like, you're denying a part of your humanity by not acknowledging that that's part of you. Like, the bad things that happen to you are part of who you are. Just because they're bad doesn't mean they're not a part of you. Doesn't mean you can forget them. And that's a really powerful message.
That's well said, Charles. Yeah, that is the kind of stuff that Robin Hobb is asking us to grapple with in the context of a fantasy book.
She loves that stuff. So it's like, you are your trauma. It's part of you. And, I don't want to think about my trauma.
We did this episode way back. This, like, why do we love fantasy or whatever? And part of what we talked about is, like, a lot of why many people read fantasy, and sometimes us included for sure, is the escapism factor of it. And certain books lend itself better to that than others. If you're looking for escapism, I don't think I can recommend the Liveship Traders as a way to get that through your fantasy.
No, but if you want some therapy,
there's plenty of
cheaper than therapy.
There's plenty of there's Lord of the Rings is fantastic escapism. So if you're looking for that, Sanderson books, which deal, of course, with some heavy topics as well, but I just have never, I've never quite been devastated by a Sanderson book to say. No. And I think there's always
does not get as raw Sanderson, as Hobb does.
It doesn't get as, like, he would never. It's not the kind of book he's writing to write like a visceral rape scene like Hobb does. Like, it's just not what Sanderson sets out to do. And that's also okay. But it's
Mm-hmm.
certain books. I'll also say Sanderson has this like just knack for even the like he could make you cry or whatever, but like there's always this kind of underlying optimism to his writing that makes it where like there's only so deep into the depths of darkness you can go before you
Yeah.
know you're gonna rise out of them. Hobble have you sit there, and
Oh,
I don't think she's like she's somewhere in between this like cynical grimdark aspect
no.
of it,
Yeah.
and then someone like Sanderson who there's the opposite, like the bright optimistic side of things. She's kind of like she's just a realist. Like she's not a
Yeah.
pessimist.
She's like,
She's not an
life is
optimist. She's a
messy and that's
realist. Yeah.
beautiful. You know, like she's
Mm.
willing to say, like, to experience some of these crazy, messed up things is to be alive, and being alive is to feel. And whether you're feeling pain or joy, it's real and it's powerful. And that's kind of to me when I've read like the Farseer trilogy and this, I'm like, why are you making me feel this way? It's so beautiful. Yeah, she challenges me like no other fantasy author ever has, and she'll have my undying respect for that. And I want to make sure we touch on two characters before we go, Malta and
Charles.
Wintro. Yeah,
Yeah. Can I just say
of course.
on Kenneth, what do you think of his dying by just some like random were they Jamalians or
Yeah.
like a random ass character kills Kenneth, right? So in a lot of books it would have been very, I don't know if easy is the right word, but it would have been a very simple answer to just have like Althea sitting there, she's stewing, and she keeps thinking like, I'm gonna kill this guy, right? And we could have had that happen, and I don't think it would have been a cop out or anything like that.
Right.
There were many ways I'm sure Hobb could have written that in a very satisfying way, but she chose not to. She chose to have him die because he got stabbed, like funny, like craziest of things, like he gets stabbed like seeming like he's protecting the satrap because we're in his head, so we know he's like, this guy is gonna be valuable to me, so like get behind me, and then he gets killed. It's an interesting choice. And
Yeah, I'm a little bit fuzzy on the details around his death. I remember.
yeah, I can remind you.
I remember like they were in battle.
Yeah, so they're in battle. Remember, the satrap is being betrayed, and then those Jamalians, they take him over to the other ship. Him and Kenneth was like trying to save the satrap because for Kenneth, he's just a bargaining chip. Like, and he's the guy who just like signed a contract or was in the process of, I think he did sign a contract that was making Kenneth king of the Pirate Islands, right? So
right.
Satrap's very important to Kenneth because he symbolizes that. He's trying to save the satrap. They take Kenneth basically hostage too. Kenneth's on this other ship, and he's with the satrap. And then we're in Kenneth's perspective, and while like Wintro and others are going to go retrieve Kenneth, they are basically the Jamalians are like, all right, we're just going to kill these two people, the satrap and Kenneth. So
it like runs
they
through
go to
the satrap and then
So-
stabs him, or the reverse.
It's the reverse. So Kenneth is like, get behind me to the satrap, and we're in his head. And we know he's like, this guy's going to be so important and valuable to me. He needs to get behind me and I'll protect him. Like, but he wasn't like, I'm going to take the sword wound for him. He was like, I'm going to fight these guys off. So he gets a satrap to go behind him, and he gets stabbed through, literally like the blade goes through Kenneth and then into the satrap, but obviously it doesn't fatally wound the satrap. It actually doesn't fatally wound Kenneth at that point. They end up stabbing, the same guy ends up stabbing him.
Stabs him again.
But it's not like a named, I don't think it's a named character, or if it's a named character, they are named like briefly in that moment.
They're not like
it is not Althea. It is not whatever Wintrow, or it's not a clear character. It is
and
some
I think
guy.
that's so because it's almost, you could almost interpret it as an act of heroism, as a sacrifice. We know in Kenneth's nature it's not really, but there's a part of you that's like, he did still do it. There is still the act of like putting him behind you, facing the guy.
I just cursed.
We're an hour and 5 minutes in. No one's listening.
But isn't that the most Kenneth thing ever, though? Is he does end up getting named the king of the pirate islands by the satrap, because in the satrap say he's like, he came to understand in the final moments of his life how important I was, and he sacrificed himself for me.
He took a blade for me.
There's really like, it's like there's gonna be songs of Kenneth, the king of the pirate islands, all this kind of stuff. So in a way, like, he does get that like
he
legacy.
Gets the legacy,
and it's the same crap it's been the whole time with Kenneth, of like, externally there are all these things of who Kenneth is supposed to be, and then internally we know what he's really like, and of course through his behavior when it comes to Althea, we like, there is that thing that he's now done in the external world where we know, like, no, he is like, he is just a despicable
and I
human being.
I think Robin Hobb tries to keep that, your conflicting opinion of Kenneth, alive, even after he does horrible things, irredeemable things, where it's like, he's bad, but he's also, he's part of this systematic cycle of abuse that is in some ways out of his control. Obviously, the action itself wasn't out of his control, but, you can make cases for the systematic, cyclical nature of abuse. And then, like, maybe there was a part of him that was trying to do the right thing that he can't even himself acknowledge, Like, is obviously a self-serving guy, but his story so well, and Robin Hobb wants to keep you conflicted on this guy because he's about to die, and she wants you to believe that he's invincible and that he's still charming in his own way, and right until the end when the guy takes the blade out and puts it in again, you're like, oh my god, and you're like, he's gonna actually die, and then he gets like lifted to the other boat, and he gets to
it's like the Vivacia and then the Paragon.
He goes to the lights, all that kind of stuff. You're like, whoa, that's pretty serious.
And you know what he also does is he give the charm to Etta, and then he's also like,
he does hand off the charm,
and then he's like, he knows at this point that she's pregnant, and he's like, he does say, you're going to name our child Paragon, which is what he promised Paragon. And in his head at the time when he was promising Paragon, or like reaffirming that promise to Paragon earlier in the book, he was like, yeah, whatever. Like, that's really on my radar. That
he made that
but
promise
then in this moment,
insincerely.
Yeah, he made it like way back, maybe when he was a kid or something like that with Paragon. And then he reaffirmed it. Like, Paragon's like, remember you were going to name your kid Paragon? And he's like, oh, yeah, like, totally. But in his head, he's like, no. Like, and then in his dying moment, he does say that to Etta. Like, you're going to name them Paragon. It's like weird things where... his behavior.
And that was also, he said, I remember the line where it's like, how could she get pregnant? Didn't she know that he had to do stuff that, like, there's that weird inner dialogue was like, he has to abuse his own child. Like, he's like, how could she not know that that I'll have to do that? Like, his brain is like wired that way. You're like, good Lord, this is a horror story as much as it is anything else, an adventure story.
Kenneth's brain. Ever since that first chapter we talked about where he's like going to the brothel and like, his opinion of himself, he's like switching back and forth, and it's like we knew from the start, like, this guy's brain is a horror show. Like, this is just the most unhealthy place to be right now. And till the very end it basically was, but it's like he did, and it's interesting, even like Althea grapples with like Kennett's influence is why Wintrow is this like great man he has become today, which is like you can't say that isn't true, but also he's such a like despicable person. It's like it's just a weird.
Like he does view Kenneth as like a son, and he does have his best interest at heart when he's not fantasizing about all the horrible things he wants to do to him and this perverse attraction he has for him. But it's because he feels this paternal friendship love for him that he also has it perversed in his head that there's this like adult child perverse nature to it. It's so bizarre, and the fact that he gets that grand send off,
it's wild. I'll say so. The choice to have him killed not by Althea, and instead, or insert other important character here. Brashin, whoever, right? What do you make of it? Why do you think she chose to do that?
I guess it would be because if Althea was like, "Oh, I killed you and now I can be at peace," like I think that would undercut her message of you're not supposed to ever get that moment. Part of life is you're not going to track down your rapist and exact your revenge. It's more likely than not you just have to live with that shit, Oh, I'm cursing now. So you have to live with that, Where it's like I think that's what she wanted to do. It's almost like in her fantasy story that's too fantastical. It's like, oh yeah, Althea gets her moment. Like no. Like that almost undercuts what she's going through and what she's overcome and the victory that she does have getting control of her life, which is to decide to be with Brashin and sell the Paragon. That's more of the victory than running Kenneth through with a sword,
Yeah. And I think it kind of does muddy up the message of like Althea ending the cycle of abuse by, it's like, you don't really end the cycle of abuse by murdering the person who abused you. Obviously the urge to do so is something that makes sense, but it's not like it doesn't really fit the narrative of Althea will not continue this cycle. It's like, no, Althea is just going to murder this person in a way that she would never do to anyone else because this abuse made her into this. It's like kind of would carry forward, I guess, the cycle of abuse rather than reaching an end the way it does with her giving that to Paragon. But it's complicated. Hobb had a really tough is just an interesting choice, I felt like. But
and then Wintrow kills the guy that killed Kenneth also, which I'm just remembering it was another piece of talk about Wintrow where he's had these, he didn't know it, but he had these kind of bad influences in his life, and he was able to take lessons from that too. But it's one of those things where here's someone who would refuse to get his hands dirty before, thinking I'm an agent of Saw, we don't do anything. Now he's just he just killed the nameless guy and walked on. You're like, okay, we've come a long way with Wintrow.
The way it is written, that you're right. It is. I can't remember the exact wording, but it was very much just he killed him without a second thought. He just killed him. It's probably 5 or 6 words, the description of killing that person. And I think it's because Wintrow by this point just is the kind of person who would do that. And that's
there's also a fun thing in here where they're over his body and he's still alive, let's get him to the ship. And then the satrap springs to life and is don't kill me, don't kill me. What a nuisance, Wintrow muttered to himself, and then bit his tongue, scarcely believing he had uttered such words. Because that's a thought that Kenneth would have had instantly of oh, it's so annoying that this guy's begging for his life, trying to get saved. What an inconvenience, so you can see some of that influence, but at least Wintrow is stopping himself and trying to correct those behaviors, which is what makes him an effective leader by the end of this book. He's able to take some of Kenneth's teachings without the perverse side of it, the traumatic side of it. He does like not believe Althea, which is a stain on his record.
He believes Etta, who believes
Mhm.
Althea.
Mm-hmm.
Who only
he comes around.
Yeah, so Etta believes that I can't remember what her reasoning was. I think it might have been just like I used to work at a brothel, like I can tell. Like I can tell when something like this has actually happened. But she says to Wintro, like, no, Kenneth did do that. And I know. And Wintro believes her. But he did not believe Althea off the bat. And he does eventually tell Althea, like, I believe you. But I'm pretty sure he says, like, because Etta told me. It's like, so it's, he does not believe his sister at face value. Or his sister, his aunt.
Yeah,
face value.
Right.
Gotta keep these family relations.
That was like a deep betrayal when, like, because a whole thing of Wintrow's character was faith, right? And like he was so trying to be faith, like he was torn between the faith of his captain, who he actually like became this prophet for, and tied his sense of religion to, and then you have his relationship to his family, who he feels dutiful to and responsible for, but never actually had the chance to develop a real relationship with. And so he's torn between the two, and he ends up, riding for Kenneth at first, and that just destroys Althea. It's this perverse manipulation of his faith that is what drove him to do that. So it's kind of it was interesting to see that part of Winchow's character being used in a way that would betray Althea so deeply, and then Vivacia as well. So it was to read that now in like the post Me Too, and now you have all this conversation around the nature of our political leaders and being, convicted criminals and this and that. And you're like, wow, this story is as rings as true today, perhaps truer than it did in its own time. It's
Definitely
incredible.
ahead of its time.
For sure. And things like that of like believing women and all that stuff is so well explored and portrayed in this that I would almost make it required reading for so many people. I'm like, this is literally what happens. And this is like the questions that Althea goes through, and like identifying like not only the act itself was horrible, but all of the betrayal and the loss of self that comes with it afterwards. It's just like so well explored. And it bleeds into Wintrow's character, who also is part of the problem. He's thinking he's following the logic, but he ended up making a mistake and having to come to terms with that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it feels the way it's explored with so much nuance and such a deft hand by Hobb, it's wild to think when this came out, because it feels so modern, dealing with things that are,
and this idea of like, hey, you want to be a leader of people, just become a sociopathic narcissist and cut off these parts of yourself, and you'll go far, but you'll also be a criminal and a horrible person at the same time.
That is particularly timely at this very moment in November. But
right. I was reading that. I'm like, she understood something about power and leaders and all that we're only just starting to learn in the popular zeitgeist of things.
Yeah,
but
I do wonder what she's thinking of all of this. She's most of what I see from
she's
her
like,
on social
called
media
it.
is like her posting her cat. So it's hard to completely grasp.
She's like, I've learned how to live a peaceful
right
life amongst the hypocrisy and the crap, because that's what all her characters do. Bad stuff happens to them, and they find the beauty in things anyway. So, Well, we're maxing out on time here. I guess Malta is the last one we should really kind of
Yeah.
bring into this, and then we can call it a day. I mean, there's Edda too. I think one of the big themes of this story is, sexism. I think is such a critical part of this story, and Malta is an interesting case because she was raised in this kind of privileged environment, kind of naive, but she had this interesting combination of being like very smart and insightful while also being inexperienced and naive.
Yeah.
So the fact that she was so crafty and could read people and could push their buttons so well, like in the first book, just pushing the grandmother's buttons like crazy, it was fun to read. And then now, and she's been put through this hardening experience, and she's had to experience the satrap, who's like the pinnacle of coming from privilege and being kind of this soft natured person, that she's now had to be the doting like caretaker role for. It was interesting to watch, and now she's kind of molded into this leader character that I'm curious to see where it goes in the future of the realm of the Elderlings.
Yeah, that's well said, Charles. I'm trying to find. I thought I highlighted it somewhere, so I'm looking through my Kindle at this time. But it's interesting. The early books, even Ronica does talk about like Malta, if you just put all this cunning and this brain to like something valuable instead of into like lying to me about crap that doesn't matter and getting
Right.
all of us in trouble, then like you could be a really impressive person one day. And while she does end up getting to that point, it is through such horrors to be able to get there. But it's one of the most impressive, I think, pieces of character development I've seen just in general, is taking character that was like this, it seemed like throwaway, almost, I don't know if I want to say comic relief, but there were elements of that in the first book. Like
There's
Malta was
truth
like
in
a
all of it, though.
non-factor character that was just like causing chaos back on the home front in a way that was like kind of funny a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then we'd see character taken from that turn into, in a very believable, gradual way, this extremely mature young woman with like political acumen and just incredible ability to basically manipulate the most powerful man in the world to get what she wants out of things. And it's like those qualities were all there, but the way they get brought out in this very serious, meaningful way is through horrible trauma. But it is a really interesting path that she ends up on. And I gotta look,
Right.
Charles, I'm gonna look as you respond for this
Right.
this
Well,
quote I was trying to find. I think it's Althea's perception of Malta, like seeing her after all of this and the way she's changed.
oh, right. Right. There's a couple moments like that with different, Althea had a moment with, what's her name? Heffa, where it's like, oh, she is, what I pretend to be, a woman who does not let her sex deter her from living as she pleases. Yeah, and a lot of people looked at Malta in those early days and thought, here's someone who could be who she pleased because, she was young and she was being shielded by Kyle, and she was clever enough to get away with things. And then when she was put in that position where she couldn't, it hardened her and made her this leader that I hope you find it with Althea, because like she comes, there's almost this envy, right?
Well, no, so I'll
Sadness,
get into it.
Was it?
Yeah. So it says, truly the girl had grown up. Althea recalled ashamedly that she had once felt that some hardship would improve Malta. Undoubtedly, she had been improved, but the cost had been high. The skin on her hands looked as coarse as a chicken's foot. The cicatrix, I'd never seen that word before, but it means her scar. On her, I don't know if I said it right. The cicatrix on her head was a monstrous thing, shocking in both color and size. But beyond the physical scarring, she sensed a dulling of her high spirits. The girl child's elaborate dreams of a romantic future had been replaced with a woman's determination to survive tomorrow. It felt like a loss to Althea. So it's like
Beautiful.
this. Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna poison Robin Hobb's beautiful words with my interpretation of them, but this is a podcast, so I'll talk. The the idea of like, wow, she has grown, she's matured, she is improved, but it can still be a loss because that innocence is gone. And even if Althea was like, geez, like this girl needs to like go through some crap, it's like, do we all have to go through that much crap, or would it be better if like maybe she wouldn't be this like mature, like really admirable person, but she wouldn't have had to go through so much crap? I'm trying to avoid our third curse.
Right. I mean, it's true, because the whole thing was Malta's becoming a respectable leader, and you see her like brokering peace, and you see her meeting Kenneth, and even Kenneth's like, interesting, there's more to this one than I thought, and he begrudgingly accepts that, and she's watching Kenneth and is learning things too. And it's funny how a little bit of humility kind of allowed her to just like skyrocket through as someone with high leadership potential. And I'm trying to remember where this book starts with her, if she's kind of already gone through all that stuff with the satrap.
She's gone through a lot at the start, but she's gone through, I think she's basically, I'll see if I can remember, but I think at the start of the book, she was still kind of at the beginning-ish of her time with the satrap. Like, she'd been with him for a while, but I think there was still that other companion that was there, like hadn't died yet. Remember, there's like another companion. So she hadn't been on the ship with the satrap for a long time or anything like that. It was like most of that stuff happened in this book.
Okay, I got it. And then we had, to me, one of the like finally moments was like Malta, Althea, Wintro, like being in the same scene. You're like, whoa, let's go, like finally.
That's where that quote
But it's interesting to
came
see they all share this. They all came from the same beginnings with this family, and their lives took them in such different directions and then brought them back. And it's like their journeys to their sense of self, and how different they are from each other, but how connected they still are. It was an interesting development, a thematic development of both how we're tied to our beginnings and our families, and how we also have to carve our own ways and make our own identities too. And for Althea and Malta especially, with this idea of being more than what this society puts on your gender. And I even remember with like Kefria, where it's like, you're more than just a mother and a daughter, like you can do other things. And Kefria's like, can I don't know. And then she ends up like helping Ronica run Big Town basically by the end. But it's I don't know, when you get to an ending like this, 3 books long, 2,000 pages, when you see these characters come back together after so much has happened, it's such a rewarding experience, and you see them react to each other in new ways, in different ways. And Althea's perception of Malta is an interesting one, where she almost has this tragedy, when Althea did nothing but, put Malta down and discard her the whole time. So, and now she comes to regret that and regret the outcome.
Yeah. It's so beautiful, those moments of, like you're saying, when they're all sitting down, we always love when we get to see characters that we know intimately from their own perspective, through the eyes of someone else who, it's like, usually we're thinking someone who doesn't know them as well and how they perceive them. And this kind of fits into that because all of these characters have changed so much that by the time they are coming back together, they have totally new impressions of each other. And Robin Hobb uses the like rotating point of view so effectively in that moment of the three of them sitting around, where we, each time that someone's telling their story, we get the point of view of one of the other Vestrits, kind of giving an impression of how they're coming off. So it's just really, really poignant part of the end there.
Absolutely. And it's kind of like, I don't know, it dovetails nicely into the end of this book about people choosing their own paths and being okay with that. I think that's a powerful piece to this.
Yeah. And there were dragons.
And there were dragons.
Which we barely talked
cool
about.
Too.
There was rain.
Well, I don't know. To me, the Tintaglia, and the serpents, kind of like the secrets of that being unveiled, where it's like, which just kind of happened in the second book mostly, but you learn more about all the serpents and like, okay, we're gonna navigate them up so they can hatch into dragons, and what that's doing, it's kind of connecting us with the Farseer trilogy, where it's like, okay, here's how maybe these magic systems are more connected and of the same origin than we thought. Oh, that's the other thing. Amber wears gloves because the fool touched the Skill River and has the stuff on her hands. Remember, that was like a thing too. So, and she takes the gloves off to work the wood, right? Because she had the skill touch or whatever. That's another clue. So
what I'm hearing is there were lots of clues, and if someone didn't connect any of those clues, then they should feel bad, right?
Absolutely.
Yes. No, don't feel bad if you're like me and you didn't connect the clues. What can you do?
It's so subtle, and it does not hinder the enjoyment of the book at all. I feel like we said in the beginning, like, you could just jump right to this and read it, and that's still true. But now I'm like, I don't know, like, those parts are cool, but you certainly don't have to read 3 whole books to get into this. I'd still say get into this as soon as you can.
So it was really cool hearing you spell all that out and have my mind blown right now in this episode, but I'm not like, oh crap, like that whole totally changes my level of enjoyment of the series that I now know that. It's like, like it's cool. Like it's really interesting. But to me, the crux of what we've talked about today, none of that requires that you read the Farseer trilogy to enjoy it. Those are ranging from Easter eggs, I would say, to like fun reveals that wouldn't be possible without having read the Farseer trilogy, but none of it is core to appreciating the like central aspects of this story. So
one thing we forgot to talk about with the Althea coming to terms with the trauma that happened to her was at the very end, after Kenneth dies, because we talked about, there really wasn't the ending there. There kind of was, because Kenneth dies on the Paragon, and then Althea and Paragon have a conversation.
Yeah, well, I talked about that a bunch, Charles.
You did? But did you talk about the fact that
she gives it back to... Yeah,
yeah,
she said that like 3 times.
Well, we'll move on then.
She gives the like pain back to the Paragon, and
right.
Because Paragon, like, it's that whole thing with the like, oh, your memories, I can't take that, and she's like resistant to it. I definitely
Like
talked about that.
it's the last piece. I have it to make myself whole, to make you
Yeah.
whole as well. You think it's yours, but you're wrong. By right, the pain is mine. Which is kind of, give it back to me. There's no reason for you to keep it. It was never even his to give you. Do you understand that? He
Yeah.
passed it on to you. He tried to get rid of pain by giving it away, but it was not his. It should have stayed with me. I take it back from you now.
So
all you have to do is let it go. Yeah.
That's what I'm
You
talking
did
about.
talk
That's
about
how
it,
it
yeah.
connects to the part about Paragon like reviving Kenneth multiple times is because that was basically Paragon in his eyes passing the pain onto Kenneth, like kind of setting him up for
The
like
hurt is
not
old
being
hurt,
able-
passed on from
Yeah.
one to another like a pestilence.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Cycle
pretty
of
intense.
abuse. And he's like, so returning it to Paragon was just like, well, this is where it really came from, especially like also Kenneth's part of Paragon at this point. So it's, yeah. But I mean, what about Egret? I feel like that's where it really started. But anyway.
And who knows where it
that's
started
for-
with Egret, too.
Well,
you
true,
know?
true. You know,
It's what Roald
That's
Dahl
true.
said, right? To love someone is to know their story. We don't know Egret's story.
No,
Sure,
but
his
we
story's
now
as
do
complicated
know,
as Kenneth's.
Come on, Charles. But we now do know the story of the Liveship Traders. Now that we
Now we do, and
Yeah,
it's
let me have
come
that seg.
to a close. Brilliant
Yes.
seg. And that's it, guys. We made it to the end of a wonderful trilogy. I have a confession, Dylan. I already kind of started the next
No,
book.
you read
the first
Fitz and the
in
Fool?
the Fitz and the Fool. I haven't read it yet. I've finished it. I'm like 5%, 10% in.
Oh, okay.
I'm starting. But I
Well,
started
no
it
wonder.
last
I bet
weekend.
it's all revealed. Well, you got fools on your mind. You know, that's how you figured it out. So
I figured it out while I was reading book
No,
3,
no.
Trust. It was the earring that gave it
to-
all. It
It
all
was
came
fun.
tumbling down from the earring.
well, I guess so. I think it's time that this episode comes tumbling down to the end.
I
Charles.
agree. Let's hand this off to Paragon now. It's his to have. Otherwise, I'll just keep going like a pestilence. Never
This
ending.
episode has kept going like a pestilence.
It has. So, what do you say we get that outro music pumping, Dylan?
Say, let's get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping, Charles.
All right, here we go. Thank you, everyone, one and all, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. If you like what you heard today, if you want to support the show, the best way to do that is over on the socials. That's at the FTF Podcast on Instagram and TikTok, and at the FTF Podcast with the number 1 at the end on Twitter. Now, Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they want to support the show even more than following us and engaging with us over on social media, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast, which you can do over on Spotify, where most of you are listening. Just click about at the top of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast feed. Click where the stars are. Throw us 5 of those. You can also rate and review on Apple Podcasts. It means you can say nice things about us. You can say, hey, that episode was barely, I can't say the word now. Pestilence?
Yeah.
That episode barely resembled a pestilence, at least for the first hour and 10 minutes. But
That's fair.
You can also subscribe or follow on your podcast app of choice, but you don't have to do that because just listening is more than enough. Thank you so much.
Well said, Dylan. Just listening is more than enough. Thank you guys for making it all the way to the end. Thank you. That's another trilogy in the books. Thank you all for listening. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.